hand on heart, it seems to me that pulling a very powerful bow repeatedly from a young age, perhaps one that was meant for an adult, would cause those bones to respond by building up a greater density and a greater cross-section.
To tie his theory down, Chris needs to compare the Towton bones with those of a present-day bowman. Few people fit the profile of a medieval archer, but Simon Stanley comes close. He has been using the longbow for much of his life.
Ever since childhood I've been interested in the bow and arrow. I've been shooting these heavy type bows for about 14 years. The people that shot the bow, they'd have been physically strong men, used to using the bodies. All your upper body comes into play with these heavy bows, right the way from your lower back to the tops of your shoulders and your neck.
So have the years of using the heavy longbow produced changes in Simon Stanley's body similar to those seen in the Towton soldiers? To find out, Simon agreed to a body scan. The scanner in which Simon's placed sends radio waves into his body through a strong magnetic field. Water molecules in bone and flesh show up differently to produce slice-by-slice images of Simon's skeleton and soft tissue.
He's 35.
He's 35 and
going to start developing that muscle development. He's pretty impressive.
For the Towton soldiers, 500 years had to pass before their bones revealed the wear and tear of a lifetime. For Simon Stanley, it would be a matter of moments.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, it's really, yeah.
Chris Knussel had found a quarter of the Towton skeletons showing unusual bone mass in the left forearm and right upper arm. He'd thought it might be associated with the distinctive pull-push action of drawing the longbow.
If we turn this around, and then I think it's a reasonable comment that yes, it does look thicker on this side.
Yes.
Compared with the right one.
So your left side is a bit more well developed in for that particular slice. The cortical bone is thicker.
Yeah.
So on the left side.
On the left side.
Yeah. And you're right-handed.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting.
That's interesting because you would expect the other way around.
Yeah.
That'd match with ours, because there's a lot of compressive strain that side.
Yeah.
The scan shows that Simon's arms are developed in exactly the same way as the grave warriors. It doesn't prove that the Towton dead were archers, but that becomes the most likely explanation.
The radius. So it fits. So we're getting left side from your elbow down into your forearm. Your left side is better developed.
Shooting 15 arrows a minute and deadly at 300 yards. These were the kind of men whose firepower had cut a swathe through the flower of French knighthood. At Towton, they met their own end. And among the bodies was one who stood out from all the rest. A big-boned man in his late 40s, he lay in the grave spread-eagled among his comrades, still easily identifiable.
As we excavated him, it was very obvious that this guy was very robust. His bones were very, not large, but very, very substantial. So he just looked like a big, muscly guy.
In death, he is known simply as Burial Number 16. His face tells a more vivid story, and he is about to carry the investigation in a startling new direction. Stung by the Yorkist arrow storm at Towton, The Lancastrians had no choice but to fight them hand to hand. The ferocity of that battle has passed into folklore. 28,000 are said to have been slaughtered in 10 hours. In the mass grave, archaeologists excavated the remains of 37 men. They'd been hacked to death. The blows that ended their lives were plain to see. But for the archaeological team, there was a second revelation. A third of these soldiers showed other, older scars, massive wounds from battles long before.
The skeletons that were found in the grave pit at Towton showed really terrifying, dreadful wounds. It's a very sobering experience looking at those wounds, but the amazing thing about them is that so many of those skulls showed signs of old injuries which had healed. So you have someone who has already experienced the face of battle. He knows exactly what he's getting into, and he's doing it again.
The soldier known as Number 16 was such a warrior. His face carries the most dramatic of the healed wounds. Examining him is Shannon Novak, a forensic anthropologist on secondment to Bradford from the University of Utah. Her work has included the investigation of present-day war graves in Croatia. With Number 16, she would be looking at the effects of violence inflicted 5 centuries earlier.
My aim was to document the trauma in the same way I would a modern forensic case, a modern homicide, trying to understand the number of wounds they had, the types of wounds, hopefully being able to interpret some of the weapons used to cause those wounds, and to look at wounds that they'd survived, some of these healed injuries that potentially they'd been in previous battles.
When he died, Number 16 was almost 50 years old. He'd have been born around the time of Agincourt. Warfare had dominated his life, and at least once before Towton had come close to claiming it.
Individual 16 received a very, very large blade wound to the left side of the jaw. The force was so great that it also caused a secondary fracture to occur in the chin. The blade coming in, fracture in the chin. This individual survived these large injuries and carried on to fight another battle, obviously.
Number 16 was a particular breed of warrior, with long experience of the horror of warfare. On the battlefield at Towton, he would have been in good company.
There would be many men with long experience in the wars. I mean, many of the old captains who fought on both sides in the Wars of the Roses had gained their experience in the latter stages of the 100 Years' War in France. And so there was an experienced body of people, veterans I think is a proper way to call them, and that would actually go down through all ranks.
What was remarkable was just how cleanly the old war wounds of these veterans had healed. It suggests that battlefield surgery of the time was far more effective than had been previously thought.
I think most of us were surprised by the lack of infection in these individuals and in relation to wounds that occurred in some kind of conflict. You would expect some bacteria to be passed on, especially in a large battle. If you're using a blade on numerous individuals, it just seems like a perfect condition for infection to occur.
The skill of the surgeon who patched up Number 16 puts medical texts of the time in a new light. Illustrated manuals were used to pass on techniques originally acquired from the Arabs. They show doctors practicing surgery of the most ambitious kind. The claims have not been taken wholly seriously, but putting a man's jaw back together was one textbook operation, which clearly worked.
There are quite detailed instructions on how to deal with a wound to the jaw. The first stage was to put wax on the place where the bone was cut to put a double layer of dressing on. You use a splint or a piece of shoe leather, the length of the jaw, and then this is very carefully bandaged onto the head and sewn onto a skull cap. The skull of number 16 is certainly a very interesting one. It's fascinating to see that some of the instructions in medical textbooks clearly must have been put into practice.
The battered skull of number 16 became the focus of intense speculation for the archaeologists of Towton. This warrior had recovered from his dreadful battle injuries only to fight again and die here. The mystery of number 16's identity began to stand for all that was still unknown about the Towton dead.
We just couldn't believe what we were seeing, that somebody with such a severe injury to the jaw and presumably also to the tongue and to the soft tissues in the mouth could have survived such an injury and been able to function properly. I presume number 16 would have looked quite impressive, quite horrific to other people.
So what had number 16 actually looked like? The archaeologists resolved to bring him back from the dead. The forensic artist, Richard Neve, is to produce a reconstruction of number 16's skull. The blows which eventually killed him present a problem. They'd completely destroyed his eye socket and cheekbones.
He's got a blade wound that runs across the left temporal line, so it's effectively bang, bang, bang. That's disrupted the whole thing, so we've lost the orbit, a little bit of the frontal bone, the upper part of the maxilla,
And half the nose.
half the nose. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Can we approximate these? Jump off that up. The lower jaw has been severely traumatized, probably 8 to 10 years prior to death, struck by a blade, horizontally, basically across that way, across the body of the mandible. And the really difficult thing is going to be how we represent that on the reconstruction, trying to ascertain those structures that have been severed and the kind of appearance that that face would have had with this, what will clearly be a very big scar across that part of the face.
The way in which number 16's scars healed are the best clue to his previous life. The sophistication of the surgery that saved him suggests that he was well connected to a noble household.
On the whole, the people who would have received medical treatment would have been rich people. On the other hand, I think it's clear that surgeons were not simply treating knights. There are some instructions which are prefaced with the words, "If a sergeant goes into battle poorly armed and without an iron hat, then he may well suffer from this kind of wound." What this suggests to me is that people who are employing surgeons in their armies were interested in the survival of their professional warriors.